Well, good evening, everybody, and thanks for sticking around and watching our series. We're continuing our series tonight with Lesson 5 in our Flex God Looks at the Heart series. And we've got a couple of announcements before we begin. But as always, we'll be teaching the lesson, and then we have some guests with us tonight that are going to discuss the lesson with us kind of in a bit more detail after we're done. Tonight we've got Paul and Jaden, and we've got as well as Hayden and Savannah, and so we'll show you guys them a little bit later on. But we've got a couple announcements first, and they're all kind of for next weekend. First and foremost, Saturday the 14th, there is a service project opportunity. I don't have times yet for that. I will be posting that on our various social medias sometime this week once I figure out what time that's going to be. It's a service project opportunity at the Kevin Hubby's house, and so I'm actually not entirely sure what we're going to be doing.
I think yard work.
But
we'll clarify.
But we'll clarify, and we'll post that when we get more details on that. And then on Sunday evening, the 15th, we've kind of set it aside as we've been doing the last 6 weeks or so. Every 2 weeks, we've been doing an activity on Sunday afternoons or Sunday evenings. Last 2 times, we've gone to the park. We've gone to Freestone Park. This upcoming week, upcoming week, the 15th, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to do kind of like an evening event, and we're going to go to some lights, go look at some kind of Christmassy lights at the farm. There is a farm kind of on this side of town over here on Power called Vertuccio Farms, and they host an event called Lights at the Farm. We'll be posting details on what time that's going to be. It's entirely outside. We'll get to look at some lights, and then afterwards we can go and get some ice cream or something else and just kind of hang out together. So we'll be posting details on that across our social media accounts here very soon as well. And then the third announcement that I've got, and we're going to be posting a more comprehensive announcement about this later this week, is that kind of officially starting last Sunday, right, from last Sunday onward, Rebecca Farr, one of our ministry team members, she's taking a sabbatical from that role. And a sabbatical is kind of like some time off from that role. She's not going to be actively leading 4Sixteen with the rest of us in the ministry team for a few months. As many of you know, there's a lot going on in her life, and she's taking care of her grandfather, and among other things. And so she needed to step back and spend some time with her family and doing some of that care that she needed to do. So what does that mean for 4Sixteen? Well, for one, myself, Janelle, and Paul and Elizabeth are still all in the ministry team, and we're going to be bringing events and bringing lessons and all the other stuff that we normally do. We're still going to be doing that. And we're going to be sort of taking over some of Becca's responsibilities in the meantime. Becca was primarily responsible for scheduling events and activities and that sort of thing. And then what does that mean for the rest of 4Sixteen? Well, for one, don't contact her about 4Sixteen stuff. She's taking a break. She's stepping back from the logistics of doing that. So if you need something for the group or from the ministry as a whole, contact any one of the rest of us, and we'll be happy to help you out with anything you need. But of course, at the same time, do tell her encouraging things. Wish her well. See how she's doing. Send her lots of love and all of those things, because that's going to be needed during this time for her. So that's kind of all the announcements that we've got right now. And like I said, all of these things we're going to be posting more detailed, lengthier posts on all of them later on in the week. And so anything that you missed right now, you can catch up then. So we might be a little glitchy right now. So hopefully that'll kind of clear up here in a little bit. So apologies if you're kind of getting sort of little bits and pieces. If anything, at the end of this, the whole video does get put up on Facebook and on YouTube, and it kind of
Works out
the bugs afterwards.
If it gets really bad, if we like freeze or just completely cut off, let us know.
Yeah. So just let us know. So those are all the announcements that we've got this week, and let's get into the lesson, shall we? So like I said, our series is called Flex, God Looks at the Heart, and we have been studying the chapters out of 1 Samuel. And tonight we're going to be focusing entirely on 1 Samuel chapter 8, right? Mm-hmm. So our lesson tonight is called The Heart of Selfishness, which is a really interesting one to do immediately after the heart of God, right? Mm-hmm. That was last week's lesson. So if you want to look at that, you can check out our archives on our various places. So the heart of selfishness is what we're talking about tonight. And sort of our focus verse is 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 19, but specifically just a small portion of verse 19. And it goes like this: but the people refused to listen to Samuel. If you know your 1 Samuel, you'll know that by chapter 8, Samuel is an old man, and the people of Israel are kind of wanting a king. They want a physical human king to rule over them so that they can be like everybody else. And we're going to be exploring what that request actually means, and how God takes it, how Samuel takes it, and how the Israelites take it. But first, for those of you that might be parents or about to be parents, or maybe you've been the child in this scenario, maybe you've heard this scenario before. Like a kid goes up to his mom and he says, "Mom, Dad, can we get a puppy?" And I don't know. So some of you might have been that child, right?
Or insert any other animal.
Or insert any other animal. You know, can I have a pony? Can I have a cat, a hamster? You know, whatever. You know, and so if the parent was a good, smart parent, they would have responded with, "Oh, you know, puppies are a lot of trouble. You have to walk it. You have to make sure it's fed. You have to bathe it. You have to brush it. You have to train it, take it outside to use the bathroom. If it ever poops in the house or whatever, that you have to clean it up. It's a lot of responsibility." And usually this kind of statement is used as like a deterrent, right? It's meant to get the kid to just drop the subject. We're not getting a dog, but you know, kind of be nice about it.
Make it your idea not to.
Make it your idea to not want the dog. But most children respond by saying, "I don't care. I don't mind doing all of that as long as I actually have a puppy or cat, pony, whatever." So many parents just break down and they get the puppy. And a month later, it's the parents that are stuck feeding, walking, cleaning up after it, all the responsibilities of it. And the kid just says, "Well, I just didn't know how much work it was going to be." Have you ever been in that position? Were you ever like that?
Yeah, of course. Like when we got kittens for the first time, once like a couple months went by and the litter box is filling up, it's like, oh yeah, that.
A couple of months and the litter box?
Well, no, like after cleaning and like taking care for a couple months, like you kind of the novelty wears off and you're like, oh, yeah, I know how to do it now. Cool. And you just kind of let it go as long as you can. Yeah,
you figure out like what's the minimum you can do and still be kind of taking care of the animal.
It was pretty bad.
Yeah. So in chapter 8 of 1 Samuel, we find, like I said, an aging Samuel and a demanding Israelite nation that was very much like a kid demanding a puppy or the pony or whatever from the parents. But instead of the puppy, Israel was demanding a king. A king. So Samuel attempted to warn them. He did all the same stuff. He attempted to warn them. So paraphrased, and we're going to read it in chapter 8 here in just a minute. But paraphrased, he says, well, you know, kings are a lot of trouble. He's going to take your sons and turn them into soldiers. He's going to take your daughters and make them cook for him. And much of the food that they'll be cooking will be food that he takes away from you. Also, if he wants to, he will take your servants and your animals and make them his. And he will treat you so badly that it will make you cry out in regret. Yet, just like a kid wanting the puppy, The Israelites replied, "We don't care. We wouldn't mind at all as long as we have a king." And although Samuel couldn't have made it any clearer, they could not see through their own selfishness, right? To the negative result that was going to come from their request. And like I said, if you know your First Samuel, you know that the king that they get after all of this is Saul, and there's a lot of trouble brewing coming from that decision. So the fact is that when we're being completely selfish, no amount of good reasoning will help us see things differently. We become blinded by our own desires. So the difficult thing about the heart of selfishness is that it is hard to detect. It's hard to tell when we're truly being selfish. So because we do everything to justify what we're thinking. We think that we're being reasonable. We think we've justified it thoroughly. We think that we're even optimistic about the situation, when in reality we've been blinded by our own wants. And so from the attitude of the Israelites in 1 Samuel chapter 8, we find 3 simple ways to detect a heart of selfishness. And so Janelle, can you read here the first way to detect a heart of selfishness?
When excuses are all you have.
When excuses are all you have. So let's find out about that. 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 1 through 5. Go ahead, dear.
When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges for Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of the second was Abijah. And they served at Beersheba. But his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have."
Okay. So what are a couple of things that we can pick up from those first 5 verses?
Just they have their argument ready to go.
They're ready. They've got their stuff. They've done their quote unquote homework, and they've really been thinking about this. But do we see another echo of something that we've already talked about in this series here with Samuel and who he appoints?
Oh yeah, his sons. It just kind of falls apart like it did with.
I was like, what happened to Samuel and his sons? Like, he grew up in dysfunction with Eli and his sons. Where did that go wrong? I don't know. That's probably a conversation for another time. But still, we have these echoes of some of the other things that we've talked about already. So the elders of Israel come and present their request to Samuel, and they back it up with arguments. And anytime we want to justify a course of action we wish to take, we come up with a list of what we think are logical arguments. These are all these reasons that we're right and you should listen to us because we know what we're talking about. And in reality, these arguments are often nothing but excuses to do the things the way we want to do them. At least when we're talking about a heart of selfishness. Mm-hmm. Like often, other times when we're in the right, when we're actually in the right and we have good arguments, that's a good thing. But when we have a heart of selfishness, that's what we try to justify. So let's examine what the elders bring up. So first, they tell Samuel that he's too old. So he's like, he's too old. Like you're aged, you're not going to be all that useful for much longer. You're knocking at death's door, buddy. You've got a foot in the grave already. So let's pack it in. At this point, Samuel is about 65 to 70 years old, which is not necessarily all that old. For someone in Samuel's position to be, and especially in the Old Testament when we know people lived for a long time. But they seem to be suggesting that Samuel is as good as dead and that his leadership is just done. The second reason is that the elders give for wanting a king is that your sons do not follow your ways, and that's in verse 5. So in other words, your sons aren't fit to lead. And the statement about Samuel's sons must have been true because Samuel doesn't deny it, and neither does anybody else, at least that has been recorded. So, but it seems kind of more of a red herring for what the real motive for the elders. And we're going to get to that in just a minute. But we hear excuses like this all the time, right? You shouldn't marry a non-Christian. Oh, but I might lead her to Christ, right? Or We should give generously. It's not the amount that matters. Excuses like that. And I could go on. There's a bunch more. But the point is clear. We can always find justification to fulfill our selfish desires. And that's true of anything. That's true of anything, not just within the church. In your life, you can always find an excuse to justify the thing that you want. And we see it happen all the time out in the world too. We see politicians do the same thing. We see companies do the same thing. We see like managers, bosses, CEOs, like teachers, all sorts of people using the same tactics to justify the positions that they take. Just excuses. Especially when it's something that's not all that good. So what's our next way of detecting a heart of selfishness?
When we try to be like the world.
When we try to be like the world. And could you read verse 5 again out of
yes.
Out of chapter 8?
Once I find it. Okay. They said to him, "You are old and your sons do not walk in your way. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have."
Okay, so you're old, your sons do not walk in your ways. But they're hidden at the very end of it, and sort of like the finishing blow, really, to the argument. And read that last part again.
"Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have."
Such as all the other nations have. Or in other words, we want to be like just like the other countries. We want to be like everybody else. So how can we tell that we have a heart of selfishness? One, when excuses are all we have, and two, when we try to be like the world. And that's the real reason the elders come up to Samuel and do this. But here's the thing about Israel. It was never designed to be like the rest of the world. It wasn't. They were the chosen people of God. And so they had to be distinct. In 1 John chapter 2, verse 15, Christians are told, do not love the world or anything in the world. So we have a similar parallel, right? We're told as Christians that we have to be separate. We have to be different. Unfortunately, too many Christians are still trying to look like, sound like, and act like unbelievers. We even justify it by saying, Paul became all things to all people. Yes, but there was a purpose behind it. And it was done without confirmation, without conformity to the pattern of this world, as it says in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. See, on the surface, the desire for a king may have seemed logical. Like, of course, if Israel were literally any other nation, not a chosen nation of God, it makes sense that they would want a king. The system that they had prior to that makes no sense if you don't have God overseeing it. Makes absolutely no sense. It had been characterized up until this time by this division. All of the tribes, all the 12 tribes, sort of did their own thing. And furthermore, there was really no real pattern for the selection of judges. It's just all of a sudden a judge would appear and it'd be like, oh, I'm chosen by God to judge these people. And that was that. So the need for a king does appear justified. Again, if God isn't present. Because that's ultimately the problem of this request. It leaves God completely out of the picture. It ignores the fact that God has chosen these people, put them together for this reason, built their nation effectively from scratch, so that they could be God's people. So there is not the slightest indication that they wanted Samuel to determine God's will regarding a king. They weren't like, hey, Samuel, we think we should get a king. Could you ask God if he could give us one? Or if he's willing to give us one? It wasn't that. It was like, no, we need a king, Samuel, and you need to step aside. There's no reference to prayer on their part, no evidence of humility either. They wanted what they wanted, and they wanted it now. Sound familiar? So the problem is not just that Israel requested a king. It was insisting that God give them a king immediately. In verse 6, we learned that the elders' request for a king displeased Samuel. Could you read verse 6 for us? Mm-hmm.
But when they said, give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord.
And go on.
And the Lord told him, listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. So they are doing to you. Keep going.
Yeah, just for saying.
Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly, and let them know what the king who will reign over them will do.
So we learn that it displeased Samuel. So of course Samuel is going to be upset. For one, like they've attacked his integrity and his age. They've attacked his sons, no matter how justified that is. They attacked his sons. And then of course, they attacked God by choosing to ignore him. So of course Samuel is going to be upset. Samuel was upset with this request from the people. And there were all of these reasons, of course. So you may have never thought of this, but when a member of a congregation fails to live like a Christian should, the elders and the ministers often grieve and ask themselves, what could I have done to prevent this? And Samuel was probably thinking that too, like, what did I do wrong? How did I let these people down so much that they want to get rid of me and get rid of God and replace us with a king? And elders and ministers in churches all over the world do the exact same thing when somebody behaves in a way that is not befitting a Christian, or when they decide to leave. What could we have done to prevent this? But perhaps the most important of all, Samuel saw what Israel's rejection of God was going to cost in the long run. What's our third way of determining a heart of selfishness?
When we will not listen to common sense.
And we will not listen to common sense. And that's going to be out of 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 10 through 20.
Okay. Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "This is what the king who will reign over you will do. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. Your men servants and maidservants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, and the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people refused to listen to Samuel. "No," they said, "we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles."
The way Samuel presented this cost to the elders could not have been more direct. He told them straight up, this king is going to mistreat you. This king is going to take away your valuables, your prized possessions, your prized people. So it was going to cost so much to fulfill this request. But just like the child wanting the puppy, none of that mattered, because in their minds, it was just a small price to pay for what they wanted. I mean, after all, cleaning up after a puppy doesn't sound so bad until you attach a smell, right? And fluids to what you're cleaning. So if you were like an elder or a minister or even just a heavily involved person in the church, you're probably thinking of one of the countless times you tried to deter someone from making a bad decision, only to watch them do it anyway and suffer the consequences. I know I've thought about that when thinking about this lesson. We've been in that position, right? Mm-hmm. We've tried to stop people from doing bad decisions, and then they go and do it anyway.
Well, I think even just friendships, speaking on a more general daily life basis, like friendships, siblings, parents, it happens to everybody at some point.
Right. Or maybe they should have listened to godly counsel too. So they say hindsight is 2020, but foresight could also be somewhat 2020 if we would just listen. I mean, the fact is, when we want what we want, we become very hard of hearing. And as God said to the Israelites through Isaiah, in Isaiah chapter 40, verses 18, the first part of 18 and the second part of 20, hear you deaf, your eyes are open, but no one hears. So what are our 3 ways of determining a heart of selfishness? Well, when excuses are all we have, when we try to be like the world, and when we will not listen to common sense. Israel's demands of a king in the face of all the bad things that they had just heard seems irrational. And no one could do for Israel what God had already done, but they just couldn't see it. Just couldn't see it. In spite of all the Lord had done, they decided to turn their backs on him and choose to have a mere mortal rule over them when they could have had the most powerful being in the universe, shaping their daily lives. They settle for a man. In reality, they were taking the crown from the Creator and placing it on the head of the created. So we've all heard the old saying, be careful what you wish for because you might just get it. Well, they got it. And in the coming lessons and later parts of this series, we're going to see the consequences of dethroning God. And that's why I said we're going to talk about some of this stuff later on. There is an old hymn called Lead Me to Calvary. To be led by God, we must listen to him because he must be our only king. As the song says, King of my life, I crown thee now, thine shall the glory be. All right, so that's the lesson part, and we're going to move on over to Bible Book Club, and we've got our friends, Paul and Jane, of course, coming back, as they do most weeks. You guys got to unmute there you go.
Got it.
And tonight, we also got Hayden and Savannah as well. Hey, guys.
Hey.
So I want to get started by sort of just opening it up. What do you guys think about this one? Heart of Selfishness, coming right in the heels of the Heart of God.
Wow. It's one of those things, there's a lot of thoughts. It's kind of hard to organize all of them. But just knowing, it's so easy to get caught up in this. And just, it's truly incredible to me how easy it is to get caught up in it and how easy it is to rationalize and to ignore all the very obvious signs because you just don't want to hear it. You're like, no, but if I know what's right, then I have to follow. So I'm just not going to listen and I can claim ignorance. Then it doesn't matter, It's just crazy. It's crazy.
I think,
Go ahead.
Sorry, Paul. I think that it can even be worse than that, where it's like, but this will be better for me. This is good for me. And of course, God wants what's good for me. Of course. And especially when he does give it to us, it's like, but you said yes. You said yes.
How come my life is worse?
Even though you told, even though from scripture, or you just know from common sense that this might be okay for a while, but there are problems in it, but God gives it to you anyway. It's really easy to turn around and be like, but you said it was okay. You gave it to me. You didn't say no. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me of I don't know how old I was, but my family had gone to a park to watch fireworks for the 4th of July or to listen to music or something. Mm-hmm. And there was this giant grass hill and we just wanted to roll down this hill. It was perfect. It was steep. We would have been rolling really fast. It would have been so much fun, but there was a sign. It was don't roll down the hill. Specifically, do not roll down the hill. Don't run down the hill. Don't play on the hill. And so we, of course, asked her mom, can we roll on this hill? And she was like, no, there's a sign that says you can't do that. But we kept asking and asking and asking. And she was finally like, okay, go roll on the hill. And we were like, really? We can? And she's like, yeah, it's right there. Go. And so we did. All of us, we started rolling down this hill. And maybe my third roll down the hill, I got stopped halfway down by a security guard. And she was like, collect your friends. You can't be on this hill. And I'm one of those kids who I hate breaking rules. I hate getting in trouble. So like I was mortified. I was the one that was stopped. There were like 3 or 4. I don't know if Jaden was there or not, but like
I don't remember the story.
3 of us walking down this hill. And I was like, I'm the one really that got stopped and told. And so like I had to collect my siblings and go back and just be embarrassed the rest of the night. But that's exactly like what happens in this story. Like the Israelites ask, they say it's going to be bad. You shouldn't. And then God says, no.
Well, we did actually read that verse.
That's true.
Do you have it marked still?
Yeah. In the end, basically, God
tells them. 21 and 22 says, when Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, listen to them and give them a king. Then Samuel said to the men of Israel, everyone go back to his town. Mm-hmm. So God just like ultimately says, just like, yep, okay, you can have your king.
So, and that's what it reminds me of. It's like, it's a lesson hard learned, but one that needs to be learned early on, that like, just because you can, just because God makes it possible, doesn't mean it's going to turn out well for you. Like in the long run, you'll learn something from it and hopefully you'll make better choices. But
well, I mean, to that point, like how many times you like pressed your mom kind of thing, there's a lot of things in our lives kind of like that where, you know, it might not necessarily be the best for us if we stop thinking of our selfish reasons, but we just press so hard to get it kind of thing. And I do kind of feel like, you know, like, I don't know, God working in millions of mysterious ways, but just sometimes there are things we end up having to learn by experiencing because we don't stop chasing it.
Yeah, there's a sign that specifically says don't roll, but you still gotta do it.
Kind of along with that, like when the answer is so clear, God is like, I don't want this for you. This isn't a good idea for you. But like we press so hard, we find as many loopholes, like we just keep zigzagging through until we get the answer that we want. And God is like, okay, I warned you, like, here we go. Mm-hmm. You can try it, but you're not gonna be what you think. And then we learn that lesson. But just like all the zigzags that we go through, all the loopholes, just trying to make it work and trying to control our lives and trying to get what we want, even though God is like, it's a bad idea.
I mean, and again, like ignoring the logic of it all is just like, there's also a very like flat, simplistic way of it. Is like, no, God didn't smite us or anything. Is like, we went after something and then faced the consequences of what that thing will do to us, kind of thing.
Yeah. Hayden, Savannah, any thoughts?
Well, kind of jumping off of the consequences thing. Well, it's not just that, because I mean, it's, you know, as like humanity, just all of us, we have these situations, and in some cases, we ran into these situations in the past, and they were collected together, like in narrative form, and we're reading one right now, like an opportunity for us to like get this hindsight. But then there's also just the hindsight that kind of like you were bringing up, you know, not just in the ministry, but like with friends, elders, that sort of thing, like locally. Like it's not just, you know, selfishness isn't just turning away from like God's word, thinking that you know better God's word. Selfishness is also turning away from all of your friends, all of, you know, the people that are surrounding you who are also saying the same things. And it's not just like God you're snubbing, you're kind of snubbing everyone. Right. And so it's like good to be listening to all these different voices that are surrounding you. Well, maybe not all of these different voices that are surrounding you, but yeah, you're just getting it from like a bunch of different directions, not just.
And that's a
really good point. Sorry, Paul, but sorry to talk over you, but that's a really good point. The idea that like it's not just selfishness isn't just ignoring God or pushing him away, but also pushing like the people who have wisdom out of your life as well. I mean, that's what the Israelites were doing too. Not only were they trying to get rid of God, they were trying to get rid of Samuel too, who had a lot of wisdom and experience to share, even though he may have been in his older age. Well, that's kind of the sweet spot for wisdom, because he's gone through so much. Sorry, Paul, go ahead.
Oh, I guess kind of going off what Hayden was said about like affecting friends and listening to the people around us and stuff like that about certain situations is just like, at one point or another, there's a scenario in our life where we're being ruled by or fighting our emotions on something. But like, there are definitely a lot of scenarios where it's like the right voice is the third party that isn't involved kind of thing, because there's less emotional attachment and they can just see things from a very like straight, clear shot kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to develop this idea of selfishness just a little bit more and kind of talk about it. Like, we've heard from Hayden and sort of his perspective on a way of defining selfishness. What about the rest of you guys? How else do you contribute to this definition of selfishness?
The thing that I think really stood out to me, as far as our story, that I think we do too, is that they had truth in their argument, like really good argument, at least like concerning his sons. It's like, well, like the people who are coming up after you aren't fit for the job. So when you're gone, then what? So like, yeah, we need a king. Obviously they forgot about God or they ignored God, but when we're selfish, there's usually a true reason that we're feeling distressed, feeling like we need to go a different direction, feeling like we deserve something better. And it's not that, and it can be very true that like, yes, you do deserve better. Yes, that is a true hardship. Yes, people can agree with you. And then they get up to that point where it's like, but this isn't the way to do it. But instead of listening to that last part, we're like, everybody is telling me that, yes, I'm in this situation that's just awful. So what else besides this am I supposed to do? Like we justify it that way, where it's like no one can really tell you what the outcome's going to be, because they can give suggestions, but no one can know what's going to happen with certain situations. It's just, you're right about this, but there's not necessarily, I can't offer you a solution. I just know this isn't the right way to do it. So since we've justified everything and we know like where we're coming from, we're right, and the outcome's wrong, we still go for it because we don't want to wait to see what the other opportunity is.
Not wanting to wait. That's kind of what I was thinking in my mind, is like, I feel like a big asset to selfishness is seeking comfort for ourselves by any means necessary. And sometimes that means not wanting to challenge ourselves in certain scenarios, even if it like results in good growth, or also just like avoiding certain responsibilities, or again, like being in bad situations that provide very temporary immediate comfort kind of thing.
Yeah, patience is not a friend of selfishness. That's for sure. They kind of go hand in hand. I guess that's my contribution to this definition, is that like selfishness is very immediate too. Like whatever it is that you want that now, and it needs to change, or you need to gain this thing or whatever now, and you don't really have quote unquote time to think about any alternate ways of doing it, or to consider going just through the challenge that is in front of you, instead of trying to kind of get around it.
I think too, like kind of going off that, like not being patient, also just not thinking ahead. Like, how is this going to affect in the long run? I don't care. I just, right now is when I want it, and like, here are my reasons for wanting it now. I don't care about the future. I don't care about what's coming. And I don't care who this affects, as long as I get it and I get what I want now. Yeah.
I feel like too, it's also kind of just a lack of consideration for other people. Like maybe you're so concerned or pressed that like all you can have in your mind is yourself, and just like, oh, these are the consequences of this action. Like I feel like selfish actions that affect other people I tend not to do, but like things that are only going to have negative consequences for me that might be a selfish choice to make, I'm like, oh, that's fine. It's not going to like hurt anybody except myself, so that's fine.
Well, and I want to explore the opposite when we make excuses based on, well, I'm going to stay in this situation, or I'm going to do this or not do this because other people depend on me, or it would hurt so and so if I did this. Mm-hmm. Even though, like, say it is the right thing to do something about whatever situation you're in, but you're like, no, that would hurt so and so's feelings, or it, you know, our relationship wouldn't be the same, or you like start using other people as a shield for the lack of your responsibility or your decision making.
Yeah.
It can go both ways.
I like that part. Yeah, just the idea, like, well, that's not hurting anyone else, but like, I mean, sure, I'll pay for it, but who cares? That's future Gabby's problem, you know.
also, that's another alleyway for comfort. I feel like it's just like avoiding a confrontation.
Yeah. Because
you say you don't want to hurt their feelings, but at the same time, their well-being is at stake. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a part of all of us who are like, oh, I just
or
can't.
Even like, or even like your own mental health is at stake. Like if you're in like a toxic friendship, a toxic relationship of any kind, and like you don't want to deal with that. So it becomes a bit of a selfish thing. Not to say that, you know, people who are in toxic relationships are like selfish for wanting to stay in them. But it becomes a bit of a selfish thing to try to avoid the confrontation and just say, well, you know, it's going to hurt this, it's going to hurt that. That's just, I don't want to deal with it that way. Mm-hmm. Can we talk about the differences between, because I feel like this is a natural segue. Can we talk about the differences between reasons and excuses? Because there's a very fine line between the two, I feel.
I feel like this one is hard because I feel like reasons are justifiable. It's like, hey, here are my reasons that back this up. Whereas excuses are like, well, these are what I think my reasons are, but really it's just going to help me get out of this and get what I want. So it's like, oh, well, I don't even have an excuse. Like, oh, well, here's an excuse and here's an excuse. And instead of, well, here's my legit reasons, and then you can tell me if I'm wrong. Like, I feel like if you have reasons, you're also more willing to like listen to somebody else. Whereas if you have excuses, you're just like, I don't care what you have to say, but here's all my excuses, and I want you to listen to them. Does that make sense?
I think that reasons have an end point. They have a foundation that you're trying to get to. Like, these things lend themselves to the result. Like, the excuses the Israelites made, there was truth in them. There were reasons, like, again, with the sons not following in the way, that's a good reason. But the motivation, the end result was not, like, their reason wasn't the main concern. The end result was a selfish desire. So the motivation was wrong. Does that make sense? I think when we have reasons, we are still looking to the ending that benefits everyone, that's healthy, that's, you know, all those things. When we start throwing excuses, it's to deflect from our true motivation for going after what we're trying to gain.
Or even just in the order that you do them sometimes. Like, usually you'll come up with reasons before the result, you know, or one would hope so, you know, because you're trying to, you know, come up with a good reason to get that result. Or but excuses a lot of the time come after the results. You know, when the result didn't go your way or didn't go the way of whoever else, you're coming up with excuses. So an excuse can be a reason. Like, you can have the same thing just depending on when you came up with it. You know, like if you're doing all of the thinking after the results happen, those are all just excuses that you're making. You should have been reasoning these things out beforehand.
Yeah, that was kind of my way of thinking too. Like, every excuse is a reason, but not all reasons are excuses. I look at excuses as sort of degrees of reasoning, where like excuses are kind of at the bottom in terms of like a quality reason. You know, saying to your teacher, oh, like my computer crashed when writing my essay, when really you just sort of slacked off. Like, that's an excuse. And sure, like, your computer may have crashed and it may have been really fortunate in that regard, because now you have an excuse. but if you had had all this time and you could have had it ready in advance, then this probably wouldn't have been a problem anyway, even if it did crash. So I like Hayden's argument there too, because like the Israelites were making excuses for previous failures leading up to talking to Samuel. This idea, your sons aren't up to the task, your sons aren't worth it. But yeah, sure, but God's there. And sure, just because in the past you may have had bad experiences with sons of leaders that didn't turn out so well, what's to say that any king or son of a king is going to be any better or any different? So to me, excuses are reasons, but not all reasons are excuses.
It is a fine line.
It's a very fine line, yeah.
The other thing I was thinking of is like when it comes to a situation of like going for something that might not be good or avoiding something that could be good, or any combination, like I think you could have both excuses and reasons for doing the same thing, but just like the excuses, like we've been talking about, lots of cover up, lots of, well, Joe Schmo looked at me wrong and I'm justified because I've been spited by Nancy girl or whatever kind of thing. But like,
these are all names from like the 1930s.
Yeah. But like, I mean, you could even be in the same situation and like just look past all that. It's like, no, I didn't do this because I'm scared.
Yeah.
Something like that kind of thing. And I feel like even if you're struggling to do something, if you can honestly admit to yourself like why you're doing it instead of making yourself feel better about like avoiding something or something like that, I feel like that could still be good.
Yeah.
I guess kind of a roundabout thing, but I was just thinking about that.
Motivation.
Yeah.
Because I had a big point in my head. Oh yeah. It's just like when just thinking about things revolving around ourselves and like, like coding ourselves in the excuses to like make ourselves always feel justified is just like, I do feel like, or at least I've felt like from times in my life that there was this subconscious feeling from time to time is that like if we mess up a single thing or like if we're in the wrong ever, it's just a permanent black mark or something like that. So we can never admit to it or anything like that. Even though even though I never outright said that, I have felt like from time to time that was something in my subconscious, and that's what's at stake when admitting something's wrong, or when I'm trying to avoid something or something like that. Whereas opposed to it's not. It like we all messed up, and it's not permanent stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to remember.
So then at the end of our lesson, we had the old saying, be careful what you wish for, you just might get it. So any thoughts on those? Have you heard that saying, or have you used that saying before?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Experienced it a lot too. Yeah.
Well, to me, it goes back to the other saying, like it leads into the saying, like, it might be what you want, but it might not be what you need. We might think this is going to be the best thing for us, and we wish for it, and we want it so bad, and we finally get it. And then we're like, oh, now I see why I shouldn't have chosen this, or why this wasn't good for me, Yeah.
Or just like the gratification of like getting something could be just super fleeting, like, you wanted it for however long, and then you finally get it, and it's cool. You get the endorphin rush for however short amount of a time that it lasts for, but then, very quickly afterwards, you kind of realize, what had to come before, what mistakes you had to make, or
Yeah,
you know, what costs come with, like, especially just, I don't know, we live in like a society of really instant gratification where it's like easy to slip into that trap.
It can taint the victory, you know, like you can finally get it, but then it's just going to be a constant reminder of like, of what you did wrong or like what you were thinking through the process. Because sometimes I think too, some of the things we want and make excuses for, maybe they won't hurt you or anybody else, but again, your motivation is just selfish. And like you don't wait for God's timing, or you don't wait for other people to help you or whatever it is. And so you push and push and push, and you finally get it, and it's still good, but it's not as good as it could have been if you had a more humble approach, if you had let other people help you, if you had, you know, ABC, whatever. And so like, yes, you have it, but then part of what the victory is will always remind you of the choices you made and how it could have been better.
Yeah, and I think we have to be like ever more like vigilant about our own selfishness and our own desire for instant gratification, because we do live in a society of enabled instant gratification. There are times where like you just do a thing or get a thing and you didn't even realize by the time between ordering something, for instance, and by the time you get it, you don't even have enough time to realize it's a mistake until like well after you've already done the thing or ordered the thing or whatever, because it's just so easy now to just do the thing that you want to do or get the thing that you want, or push someone one way or the other. So it's kind of like it's a wise warning. It's a sort of stark reminder, but one I think even more important now for us today than perhaps in the past. So, all right. Well, I think that's actually a good place as any to kind of wrap it up for the night, since we're kind of running out of time here. Thank you all for joining us this week and for all your comments and stuff. Paul, Jaden, Hayden, Savannah, pleasure to have you guys here with us. And for all of you that were out there watching or are going to be watching later in the future, thank you for watching us tonight and participating in our class. Again, quick reminders of our announcements. We've got the service project next Saturday and the lights event next Sunday evening. We'll be posting more details about that on our social media. So yeah, that's it for tonight, and good night.